January 14th, 1945. The frozen air above Bavaria shimmered with contrails, long white scars against the pale sky. Below, valleys slept under snow, their silence broken only by the hum of engines passing overhead. Inside the cockpit of a B-17 Flying Fortress, Captain Robert Bob Keane adjusted his oxygen mask. His gloved hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the cold that bit through the fuselage. The formation around him was tight. 50 bombers, each loaded with 4,000 pounds of explosives, on a course few fully understood. Their target wasn't on any official Allied map. No reconnaissance photo had confirmed its existence. Yet somewhere beneath those ridges lay a hidden factory, deep underground, built by forced labor, protected by mountains and secrecy. And the only clue to its location was folded inside Keane's right boot. A hand-drawn map, smuggled out of occupied Europe by a resistance courier months earlier. That single piece of paper would change the fate of hundreds of men and reveal one of Nazi Germany's most concealed weapons sites. The story begins where faith met precision in the frozen skies of southern Germany. By the dawn of 1945, the war in Europe was entering its final, violent phase. The Allies had broken through Normandy, Paris was free, and the push toward the German heartland was relentless. Yet for all the victories, one shadow still lingered: the mystery of Germany's secret weapons program. For months, Allied intelligence had intercepted whispers, hidden assembly lines, underground fortresses, and production sites carved beneath mountains. The Luftwaffe was bleeding, the Wehrmacht retreating, but somehow, new jet fighters, rockets, and armored prototypes kept appearing at the front. It didn't make sense. Something, somewhere, was still building them. To the men of the U.S. 8th Air Force, these rumors translated into a mission that was as dangerous as it was uncertain: destroy Germany's capacity to produce. But finding the factories was another matter entirely. Many had been relocated after the Allied bombing of industrial cities like Hamburg, Schweinfurt, and Peenemünde. The Reich scientists had learned to hide. Across occupied Europe, intelligence officers worked with local resistance networks to locate these facilities. French, Dutch, and Polish partisans passed coded reports to London. Couriers risked execution to smuggle sketches and coordinates across borders. Still, the evidence often came in fragments: a worker's memory, a faint aerial photo, a rumor overheard in a train station. It was one such fragment that reached the desk of the U.S. Strategic Air Forces in late 1944. A rough, hand-drawn map showing a narrow Bavarian valley, with a strange cluster of railway spurs disappearing into the hills. The document was said to have come from a forced laborer who had escaped from a camp near the town of Landsberg am Lech. He had drawn it from memory, marking a single word at the edge of the valley: Weingut 2. Few in Washington or London knew what Weingut 2 meant. To German engineers, however, it was a code name. Winery 2, one of several vast subterranean sites built to protect weapons production from Allied bombs. At that time, these bunkers were believed to be part of the Messerschmitt network, assembling the Me-262, the world's first operational jet fighter. But the Allies didn't have a confirmed location. Their reconnaissance aircraft had photographed parts of southern Germany repeatedly, yet camouflage, tunnels, and cloud cover had kept these facilities hidden. Intelligence analysts debated whether the Weingut map was genuine or another German deception. Then came a new clue. In early January 1945, the French resistance transmitted a coded message to London confirming heavy truck movements near Landsberg, guarded by SS units. Witnesses described trainloads of machinery being shunted into hillside entrances. Something massive was being concealed. When the reports reached the 8th Air Force's headquarters in England, they coincided with a growing urgency to cripple what remained of Germany's jet program. The Me-262 had already proven deadly, outrunning Allied escorts and shooting down bombers at unprecedented speeds. If its production continued, the war's end could be delayed by months, perhaps more. Thus, the command authorized a blind strike, an operation to hit a target that wasn't officially confirmed but was deemed critical enough to risk men and machines. The coordinates would rely heavily on the smuggled map, the one drawn by a trembling hand on scrap paper, now transferred to navigation charts and placed under the care of one bomber crew. That crew belonged to the 398th Bomb Group, based at Nothampstead, England. Among them was Captain Robert Keane, a young but seasoned pilot with 26 missions behind him. On the morning of January 14th, his flight orders were unusual. The target brief simply read, "Suspected underground aircraft facility, Landsberg region, Germany. No photos, no recon slides, no confirmed defenses." It was a mission flown on trust. Trust in intelligence, trust in resistance networks, and trust in a simple map drawn by a man who had seen hell and escaped to warn them. And as the engines roared to life on the airfield, the weight of that paper, hidden in Keane's boot, was heavier than any bomb aboard his aircraft. The target might have been uncertain, but the mission was clear. And as the B-17s lifted into the gray English dawn, another layer of the war's hidden machinery began to reveal itself. By early 1945, Germany's industrial landscape had become a graveyard of rubble and smoke. Allied bombing campaigns, Operation Point Blank, Big Week, and countless follow-ups, had crippled surface factories and rail networks. But Hitler's engineers had not surrendered to destruction. They had gone underground. Under code names like Weingut Y, Weingut II, Diana II, and Bergkristall, entire production lines were being tunneled beneath the Alps and Bavarian forests. These sites were built not only for secrecy but for survival. Vast caverns reinforced with concrete, designed to withstand the heaviest Allied bombardment. The heart of this subterranean effort lay with the organization Tod, the Nazi construction corps infamous for its ruthless use of forced labor. Tens of thousands of prisoners from Dachau and its subcamps were driven daily into mountainsides, drilling through rock in inhuman conditions. Few survived long. Their work, however, allowed Germany's most advanced aircraft, including the Messerschmitt Me 262, to be assembled in facilities that Allied bombers could not easily reach. The Allies were aware of the existence of such shadow factories, but not their locations. Air reconnaissance had its limits. Clouds, camouflage nets, and decoy sites confused even the most experienced photo analysts. Ground intelligence was scarce. German secrecy was absolute. What broke that silence were people. Civilians, partisans, and prisoners who managed to escape. Among them was a Polish engineer named Marek Kowalski. Captured in 1943 and assigned to a construction detail in southern Germany, Kowalski had memorized details of the underground project he worked on, its tunnels, its nearby rail junction, and the river that fed the valley. When he escaped during a chaotic prisoner transfer in late 1944, he sought out resistance contacts near Augsburg and drew everything he could remember on a sheet of paper. That drawing, smuggled through neutral Switzerland, eventually reached Allied intelligence. Though his name was changed in official reports, Kowalski's memory provided one of the most vital clues to locating Weingut II. The sketch included precise topographical features, a serpentine road, a double railway line ending at a bluff, and a series of ventilation shafts emerging from the hillside. Analysts cross-referenced these with aerial photos of the region, and one pattern fit: a remote area near Landsberg am Lech. Yet doubts persisted. Could one man's recollection justify sending hundreds of airmen into heavy flak territory? The question divided planners at the Allied Air Intelligence Branch. Some argued it was a trap, that Germany might be feeding false coordinates to mislead bomber groups. Others insisted that waiting for more proof would allow the jet program to recover. The debate ended when new intercepts confirmed increased radio traffic from SS and Luftwaffe units stationed around Landsberg. Something important was there. Something they didn't want found. By the second week of January 1945, the 8th Air Force Command issued a new directive. Target: suspected underground aircraft manufacturing installation, Landsberg area. destroy associated rail lines and supply nodes. Secondary target, Augsburg Rail Yard. The operation would involve the 398th, 91st, and 303rd Bomb Groups, a combined force of over 120 B-17s escorted by P-51 Mustangs. Their departure point, Nothampstead, England. Their fuel load, near maximum, given the distance to Bavaria and back. As pilots attended their mission briefing, the room was unusually tense. Intelligence officers described the area as moderately defended, though no one could confirm how many anti-aircraft batteries surrounded the supposed factory. What captured everyone's attention was a single chart projected on the wall, a copy of the hand-drawn map. Its uneven lines and smudged ink betrayed the desperation of its creation, yet the officers spoke of it as if it were gospel. For Captain Robert Keane and his crew, it represented something more than coordinates. It symbolized the fragile link between faith and fact in wartime intelligence, the idea that sometimes the smallest fragment of truth, carried through human courage, could alter the course of a campaign. Outside, the airfield buzzed with the deep rhythmic growl of engines warming up. Mechanics checked bomb loads. Ground crew handed pilots last-minute weather updates. A cold drizzle coated the runway, reflecting the dim light of the hangars like liquid steel. Keane slipped the folded copy of the map into his boot, not out of superstition, but practicality. If the aircraft went down, he wanted it close. He could not know that, by nightfall, the information he carried would lead the first wave of bombers directly over one of the most concealed facilities of the Third Reich. As the sun rose over England, a line of silver bombers lifted into the clouds, heading east. Each man aboard believed they were striking at the heart of Germany's hidden power, though none could predict how deeply that power ran beneath the earth. What they were about to uncover was not just a target, but the scale of a nation's desperation, a secret carved in stone beneath the Bavarian hills. For every airman aboard those bombers, war had long since lost its romance. By 1945, the men of the 8th Air Force were veterans of relentless attrition. Friends lost over the North Sea, planes torn apart by flak, and missions that left little room for sentiment. Yet the operation over Landsberg felt different. They were flying toward a target that officially didn't exist. There were no photographs, no confirmed coordinates, no radio beacons. Just a rumor, a sketch, and faith in the unseen. Captain Keane's crew represented the composite face of America's wartime youth. Gunners from Kansas, a navigator from Chicago, a co-pilot barely 21. They had learned to trust their instruments, their training, and each other. But now they were being asked to trust a nameless prisoner who had drawn a map months earlier under unimaginable duress. To them, it wasn't just another mission. It was a question of belief. Could human courage and memory pierce the fog of war, where intelligence machines had failed? As they crossed into German airspace, the tension inside the fuselage was almost physical. Each man stared out the small frosted windows, searching the white wilderness below for landmarks matching the map's uneven lines. A river bend, a fork in a railway, the slope of a hill. Somewhere in that geometry lay a truth that could justify their risk, or lead them all to their deaths. The navigator's voice crackled through the intercom. Approaching target zone in 10 minutes. The moment felt unreal, as if guided not by technology but by intuition. And deep in his boot, Keane felt the paper pressing against his ankle, a silent reminder that the war's most valuable weapons weren't always made of steel. From a tactical perspective, the Landsberg strike represented the culmination of years of evolution in Allied bombing strategy. The early war missions had been chaotic, relying on dead reckoning and celestial navigation. But by 1945, technology had advanced. Radar bombing systems like H-2X Mickey allowed crews to target through clouds using radar reflections of terrain. Yet even with these innovations, the operation against Weingut II demanded precision bordering on the impossible. The underground facility was buried within ridges, invisible from above, and heavily camouflaged. Its entrances were masked by trees and false barns, Standard aerial photography had failed to detect it. Even radar offered little clarity due to the natural rock formations. Thus, the U.S. Army Air Forces employed a layered tactic, a combination of blind bombing and terrain correlation. Using the hand-drawn map, the navigators were instructed to identify 3 reference points: the Lek River, a railway split, and a triangular clearing. These would form the approach triangle. Once the lead bomber confirmed visual alignment with those markers, the others would follow its drop path precisely, trusting the lead's calculations. The formation flew at an altitude of 20,000 feet, high enough to avoid small arms fire, low enough for accuracy. The escorting P-51 Mustangs swept ahead, clearing the skies of any potential Luftwaffe interceptors. But in January 1945, few German fighters remained. Fuel shortages and chaos had grounded most squadrons. The greater threat came from below, the notorious Flak 88s. Positioned along the railway line and the town's outskirts, these anti-aircraft guns were the last teeth of a dying Reich. Their shells could reach the bombers with lethal precision. For every second a bomber lingered in the target zone, survival odds dropped sharply. A successful run required near-perfect timing. One error in navigation, and bombs could fall on civilian towns or empty hillsides. The operation was thus both a tactical experiment and a moral burden. The hand-drawn map wasn't just intelligence, it was the center of a massive orchestration involving dozens of aircraft, hundreds of men, and thousands of pounds of explosives, all converging on a point drawn by a pencil on worn paper. To the planners in England, it was a calculated risk. To those flying above Bavaria, it was something closer to blind faith wrapped in procedure. Beneath the Bavarian soil, Weingut II represented one of Nazi Germany's most ambitious and desperate projects. It was part of the Mittelwerk-style network, subterranean complexes built after the devastating raids on Peenemünde in 1943. The aim: move critical weapons production underground, beyond the reach of Allied bombers. At Landsberg, the operation was run by Organisation Tot engineers and SS guards from Dachau's subcamp network. The labor force consisted of thousands of prisoners, Poles, Russians, Hungarians, and Jews, who worked in 12-hour shifts under brutal conditions. The tunnels extended nearly half a mile into the hillside, reinforced by concrete walls 2 meters thick. Within those chambers, workers assembled components for the Messerschmitt Me 262 jet, the fighter Hitler believed would turn the tide of war. But delays, sabotage, and shortages plagued the effort. Many components were smuggled out damaged or incomplete. Still, the project persisted, symbolizing the regime's delusional faith in miracle weapons. By January 1945, SS reports indicated that production was nearly operational. Heavy equipment had been transferred from Augsburg and Regensburg, and Me 262 fuselages had been sighted on railcars entering the tunnels. Allied analysts would later confirm this. Weingut II was one of the final nodes in Germany's attempt to mass-produce jet aircraft underground. To the German commanders on site, the facility was their last hope. Luftwaffe officers believed that if they could deliver just a few hundred jets, they might stall the Allied advance, force negotiations, or at least die fighting with technological superiority. But above them that morning, American bombers were closing in, guided by a map drawn by one of the very prisoners they had enslaved. It was poetic justice carried on wings of steel. And beneath those mountains, as the sirens began to wail, few inside realized that their fortress of secrecy had already been betrayed by the human memory they had tried to destroy. The confrontation over Landsberg wasn't only between men. It was a collision of machines that defined the coming century. On one side, the Messerschmitt Me 262, the world's first operational jet fighter. On the other, the Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress, a symbol of American industrial might and endurance. The Me 262 was a marvel of engineering, capable of speeds exceeding 540 mph, nearly 100 mph faster than any Allied piston aircraft. But it arrived too late. crippled by fuel shortages, limited materials, and Hitler's obsession with turning it into a bomber instead of a pure interceptor. Still, each completed aircraft represented a glimpse of the future. Jet propulsion, swept wings, radar-guided gun sights, innovations that would shape post-war aviation. The B-17, by contrast, was the workhorse of the skies. It lacked elegance but made up for it with resilience. Its 4 Wright Cyclone engines could sustain massive damage, its armored frame often bringing crews home despite shredded wings and dead instruments. For missions like the Landsberg strike, the B-17's reliability was everything, a flying anvil carrying faith and firepower. At 25,000 feet, technology met endurance. The American bombers relied on Norden bomb sights, precision optical systems that allowed trained bombardiers to aim within a few dozen yards from miles above. The Germans countered with radar-guided flak and smoke generators to obscure the valley. Ironically, both sides were using cutting-edge science to protect or destroy the same thing: the future of flight. As historians would later note, Weingut-Dussatou symbolized the technological paradox of the late war. Germany had designed the most advanced aircraft in the world, but lacked the industrial stability to produce it. The Allies, with simpler designs, mastered the art of mass production and logistics. The bombers flying that January morning were proof that efficiency, not innovation, would decide the outcome. The jet age was being born amid ruin, and above Landsberg, it was being baptized in fire. The order to bomb Landsberg was not taken lightly. At 8th Air Force Headquarters, Major General James Doolittle, famed for his 1942 Tokyo raid, had wrestled for days with uncertainty. Intelligence officers could not guarantee the factory's existence, yet the consequences of inaction were severe. The Me-262, if produced in sufficient numbers, could render the daylight bombing offensive unsustainable. Doolittle's leadership philosophy was pragmatic. You must decide. You may be wrong, but you must decide. And so he did. The plan required absolute coordination between reconnaissance, navigation, and strike elements. Doolittle personally reviewed the resistance reports and authorized the mission under the logic that even a false target was preferable to a missed opportunity. The Allies could afford the fuel and bombs. Germany could not afford the destruction of its last safe haven. But leadership on the ground was different from leadership in the sky. For Captain Keane and the squadron commanders, leadership meant holding steady under fire, making split-second calls with men's lives hanging on instinct. It meant trusting orders that lacked clarity, and ensuring those under you never saw your doubt. As formation lead, Keane was responsible for maintaining visual discipline. If he faltered, hundreds of bombs could scatter across the countryside. His calm under pressure reflected the quiet professionalism forged by years of attrition. He didn't need to inspire speeches. The fact that he took off every morning was leadership enough. The contrast between Doolittle's strategic decisiveness and Keane's tactical composure embodied the hierarchy that made Allied air power work. Vision above, execution below, linked by trust, not certainty. In hindsight, historians view the Landsberg strike as a masterclass in wartime command, an example of when imperfect information demanded perfect resolve. Even in victory there was discomfort. Allied intelligence officers who later visited the ruins of Weingut II found not only twisted steel and concrete, but the bodies of forced laborers who had been trapped when sections of the tunnel collapsed. For the survivors, liberation came with a cruel irony. The very bombs that destroyed their prison also buried many alive. This moral paradox haunted many in the post-war years. The map that guided the bombers had been drawn by one of those prisoners, yet his warning led to the deaths of hundreds who shared his captivity. It was a reminder that in total war, even acts of salvation carried shadows. From the air, the crews had seen only smoke, flashes, and the satisfying bursts of successful hits. They didn't see the men underground, the ones who had dug the tunnels they were now burying. The separation between cause and consequence was vast, yet inseparable. War demanded moral compartmentalization. The airmen fought to end it. The prisoners fought to survive it. Their fates intersected in the same valley, under the same explosions. Years later, some of Keene's surviving crew members would admit to mixed feelings when they learned what Weingart 2 really was: a forced labor nightmare masquerading as a miracle factory. Still, none doubted the necessity of the strike. Every bomb dropped on Landsberg was one less Me-262 taking to the skies. The map in Keene's boot had not only guided destruction, it had accelerated liberation. But the question lingered in every veteran's memory: at what cost does truth become salvation? And as the smoke cleared over the Bavarian Valley, the moral haze of war settled in its place, silent, unending, and deeply human.